Do you want to finish eating your chocolate? Okay. Are you dipping your chocolate in your tea?
Yeah.
You're insane.
Living on the wild side.
Hello and welcome to Literary Canon Ball. Literary Canon Ball is a podcast for anyone who wants a fun and feisty conversation about books. I'm Kirby Fenwick and I'm joined by...
Neve Marnie, student by day, writer, editor by night, and reader by nature.
Nice. And...
B. Murphy, reader, writer, cheerleader? No,
Like, if that could work, like reader, writer, cheerleader, because it sort of rhymes.
There's some rhyming happening.
Yeah, but
it's nice.
It's also a lie. I think I would show up and just be sarcastic. Why are people being happy? No. Anyway, sarcastic. Tick.
How are we feeling today?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Winter's nearly over.
I'm not overwhelmed, and I'm not underwhelmed.
We're just
Whelmed.
Yeah.
nice.
No, I'm pretty good. I'm excited to talk about this book. I feel like we've got things to say about the book and books in general.
Nice.
And my recommendations list has gotten longer since we last spoke. I'm sorry. I know. I tried to prune it back and I've taken things off and I put some things on. And...
Look, our fans love the recommendations, so don't worry about it.
Thanks, Mum.
Okay, before we jump into book chats even, a quick reminder that if you'd like to know a little bit more about what we're all about, we recommend jumping back and listening to our pilot episode where we delve a little deeper into all things Literary Canon Ball. So, to our book for episode 4. Can you believe we're at episode 4?
I can't wait to celebrate double digits.
Yeah.
I'll start making the piñata.
Nice. So in 2012, Australian publisher Text Publishing launched the Text Classics, a series of books that aim to reintroduce Australian readers to their literary history. In the past 5 years, 115 text classics have been published. Helen Hodgman's Blue Skies is one of them. Originally released in 1976, Blue Skies tells the story of an unnamed narrator, a young woman who is also a wife and mother. Set against a backdrop of suffocating suburbia under the glare of a biting Australian sun, Blue Skies peels back layers of mid-century social respectability, revealing a woman who, as one reviewer wrote, is like an elastic band that's stretched too tight and about to snap. There is a sharpness and urgency to this writing that propels the reader along, but there is also a darkness, a sense of foreboding that settles over the prose and refuses to leave. Author Nicholas Shakespeare called Blue Skies a memorable novella, sensuous, strange, prickly as a sea urchin. And what do we think?
I don't think that can be topped, that sea urchin kind of descriptor.
We're done? Okay.
Yeah. We'll just
Efficient.
link to that review on the website.
And we're done.
No, just that line. That's good. This book is barbarous and it lingers and it took me a while to read. Like I got quite... it's a novella and it comes in at...
It's like 159 pages or something like that.
Exactly right. Cute photographic memory.
Yeah.
And it's quite a generous, beautiful kind of the typesetting. The margins are quite big. So it's not a long read, but it took me probably a week and a half to get through it because I needed breaks from the protagonists, from the world that they live in.
It's somewhat heavy.
Oh, I think it's still reverberating, to be honest. I think this is the sort of book, there's certain descriptors and scenes in it that are just going to kind of do a little background leap in my brain and occasionally come up to the surface and shock me and then just kind of settle back down. I don't think I'm going to forget it. I don't know if I'm happy about that or sad. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I guess I kind of feel the same way. I didn't read it in an extended period of time. I read it on a plane to Perth, so I read it cover to cover in like 3 hours, which was not difficult for me to do. Like I just sort of went straight through it. There were a few times where I was like, put the book down on the little tray table and thought, that was interesting, but then picked it up and kept reading. So I'm not sure if that's coloured my sort of perspective of the book, but
it's a blue sky perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of am not 100% sure what I think, which is kind of a weird place for me to be in.
Have you still been thinking about it? Like, has it been bubbling around, or?
There's elements of it that have been bubbling around, like the idea of the woman as the anti-hero is something, or the anti-heroine has been something that's kind of stayed with me, and I've sort of been doing some research around that separate from the book, just the idea of it.
Do tell.
Well, there's there was a review done on Crikey for this book somewhat recently, and we'll link to that in the show notes, and it talks about what it said. I'll quote directly from it. It says, Blue Skies is an unashamedly feminist novel. Our protagonist is an anti-hero, anything but maternal, sexually adventurous, emotionally inept, and a prisoner of her own self-absorption. She's not a likable character, but she's definitely a familiar one. And that kind of, you know, reading the book and reading that kind of paragraph there, that sort of idea that if you are not maternal, if you are sexually adventurous, you are therefore an anti-hero or like not a good woman.
I really disagree
with
that
kind of
review.
like the underlying sort of feeling of that paragraph there, and perhaps I'm misreading that writer completely, but that's what I sort of got from it. And that really frustrated me because I feel like characters like the narrator of this book are important because those stories are real. You know, there are women in the world that have those experiences and feel that way about motherhood, that postnatal depression is a thing. So to suggest that if you are that person and that is your experience, you are somehow some kind of anti-hero or, you know, not a great person or, you know, whatever the connotations are around that, kind of really frustrated me.
Yeah, and also I think there's an expectation, especially with female characters, that they have to be likable.
Yeah.
That's the bar that you should set. And that's bullshit because we have great male characters, famous ones, aren't particularly likable. Like if you met them on the street or something, you're probably like, oh, they're a bit of a douche.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I would not look at Mr. Darcy. I would be like, who are you and your rudeness? Rude. Because I get to, you know, insight into his feelings.
Oh, well, I mean, I suppose with, I don't know if I'd say with Mr. Because his character progression is what makes him like a great romantic hero. How he sort of realizes, oh wait, I was actually kind of a dick. And
well, exactly. Like when he starts out as being unlikable, yet there's a sense of giving him enough space to be unlikable. And he doesn't, you know, it's only through his own personal growth that he becomes likable. It isn't society saying, you know, you shouldn't.
Yeah, and also having an unlikable,
I feel like
romantic hero.
Well, I feel like in this example, society is kind of being more like, well, you kind of should be like this and you should be like that, because there's the character of the mother-in-law, and there's a few key female characters in this that the unnamed protagonist, which is interesting in itself. Her name is never revealed, so she's kind of not a shadow figure of a woman because she's really fleshed out with a lot of detail, but
there's a distance there.
There's an incredible distance because without a name, I found as a reader, I was really trying to connect with this woman to understand her, and I was feeling like I was doing a bad job as a reader because I was like, what? Wait, where have I missed it? Have I missed something here? And I often felt on the back foot throughout this book because there's a tremendous amount of economy to Hodgman's writing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That it is disorientating and disruptive because intentionally it's quite vague in some sections, and it really demands quite a lot of work of the reader to keep the story in their mind, because it's not a linear story. It's kind of told through a protagonist who's going through a lot of mental health issues, and I feel like Hodgman was quite successful in creating quite a disruptive and disturbed view of the world. Disturbed as in nothing is stable and set in place, yet nothing actually happens. It's this kind of weird dichotomy.
You don't think things happen in this book?
Well,
some pretty big things happen.
Things happen plot-wise, but the story of the character itself, she kind of feels like she's constantly bored and nothing happens in her life, and she's searching for excitement.
Did you feel, I got a real sense when I was reading it, of that sort of, you know, Australian summer, the suburbs, the beach, you know, the heat. I did get a real sense of that. I think Helen Hodgman did that really well, that sort of the building of the landscape. And a lot of her descriptions, there's a lot of richness and a lot of depth to them. And so I did sort of, I did feel...
I almost felt like I knew more about the landscape than I did about the protagonist.
Interesting.
I was really grounded in the suburbs.
Yeah.
The lawn. I knew a lot about the lawn.
Yes.
Like, I'm well aware
it's a
about that
recurring
lawn.
theme.
And that was genius. Like...
Oh, yeah. Because she opens the novel with this lawn, you're sort of like, okay. And then, like, the lawn comes up with, like, the statue that has the friend makes... has the lawn, like little figurine with the lawn, and the lawn keeps coming up, and then the lawn comes up at the end in a very big way.
Yeah.
What you were mentioning previously, Neve, how you viewed the lawn through a different lens beyond gardening, which I think it's how you described it previously was great. With the native grasses and the idea of colonialisation.
Well, yeah, definitely, because at the end, you can see that Hodgman, throughout the novel, there's constant reference to Indigenous people and how they were dispossessed of their land, and then at the end, she sort of established this parallel storylines with the protagonist and her sort of fascination with the Indigenous people, and how like she didn't feel connected to the land that she was there. She didn't feel connected anywhere, and then she was watching this native grass be mown over and over and over, and then she sort of I don't know, she almost reclaimed it, or sort of, I feel like there was almost because she was sympathetic, by using the spearhead / rock, she was sort of, it was like almost an attempted decolonialization of this one very tortured, I think it's described, tortured piece of land.
She's trying to stop the continuous mowing of that land and it's a really interesting metaphor. There's so much metaphor in this book. I think there's so much, maybe metaphor is the wrong word, but there's so much under the surface that's just sort of, and maybe it's got to do with the time when it was written. But yeah, it does feel like there's so much happening under the surface, you know, about those ideas of colonisation and what happened to Indigenous Australians in Tasmania, which, if anyone has any kind of understanding of Australian history, will know was horrific.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, but then there's also other sort of subtle things happening underneath. I know with the character Jonathan as well, those sort of ideas of what was happening around, what happened to him, why was he getting arrested, and those sort of things. I know you were talking about that too, Neve.
Yeah, I feel like I was very invested in the themes of this novel, maybe more so than the characters.
Yeah, right.
That's such a great way of putting it. Yeah, Hodgman kind of wants that. The themes to speak beyond
the character.
Yeah,
because they are quite universal themes. Like, I mean, I find that they're still resonant today despite changes in technology. God, I sound like such an old woman now. Technology.
But there is that sort of feel that so much of what is happening in this book is contemporary in many ways, even though this book is, I think it's supposed to be set in the 60s, or, you know, even if it was set around the time it was written in the mid 70s. there is still so much of the story that feels quite contemporary in many ways.
Yeah.
I didn't get that sort of... I didn't feel like I was reading a book from the 70s, you know, that had all this sort of...
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, maybe
well, I mean, I feel like the writing style was very contemporary. The whole idea of suburbia and that suppression feels very contemporary. I mean, there are elements, of course, that weren't particularly contemporary, which, going back to Jonathan, that character was very queer-coded in terms of, like, one of the scenes was the protagonist and Jonathan hiding out in his restaurant because there were guys outside threatening to bash him up. And then later on, there's this somewhat ambiguous lawsuit against him, and the last we sort of know about him is he's sort of fled, or possibly there was blood on the floor. And also within the context of history, it wasn't until 1997 that Tasmania decriminalised homosexuality. So there was some ambiguity. And I think that was a theme as well, the idea of suppressed sexuality with a lot of the characters. I mean, the main protagonist, like, had sex with a guy one time and then married him?
I find that really interesting with how you described it, a book of themes rather than specific plot points. And I think that actually makes it still quite a fresh, relevant read, because it gives the reader so much kind of independence of, like, you can literally read passages in this book and they're so sparse that you can kind of fill it in with your own thoughts and feelings and context
definitely.
of the time. Even with the marriage, because there's a line that is, it's so ambiguous that it's brilliant, and it's kind of referencing the marriage, but also postnatal depression, and I don't actually know which one, so I'll find it interesting what you guys think. Husband, wife, and child asleep under one roof seemed one person too many. Security goes in twos.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Is she aligning herself with the husband or the child? Like,
I think she's
the twos?
I think they're the two, and she feels on the outer. Because
Or
even the
that.
way she's like, even the way she refers to the baby is always like James, who's her husband, you know, James's daughter. I find that really interesting as well, and that kind of points to that postnatal depression as well.
Yeah.
Definitely didn't read it like that, of them being the two. I thought that's interesting. But she does always, I think the language in this book makes it quite curt and painful in some places. Like, even how she describes the woman of her mother-in-law is like, this is the mother of James. I am married to James. Like, it is creating such an aching span of distance between herself and everyone around her.
But I feel like that's deliberate.
Yeah.
Exactly, but I think in that space creates ambiguity, and it also creates a sense of disorientation for the reader, because we never know her explicit thoughts. We know how she's phrasing things, but I don't think we're actually grounded in her sense of, like, I think we're given more clues than clarity for a lot of things in this book.
Yeah, it almost feels like, because there's no name and we're not giving much of her history, it kind of feels like we're placed in her point of view. Like, it's not as, like, deliberate as having maybe it written as in second person, but in that way, because we're encouraged to sort of project, have our, like, for example, because you picked up on different stuff than I picked up on, and so I feel like this is sort of the Rorschach test of books, if that makes sense.
Wow, okay, that's really interesting. I think maybe I tend to agree. Maybe I do.
Which I kind of find it interesting, because maybe that's why this book will prove to have longevity, because it's not a shell of a book that's doing it a tremendous disservice, but it allow so much space that, like, if you were to return to it in, say, a decade's time, perhaps that reading experience would be tremendously different, because there is that space
for the reader.
Insert yourself into a book. And I don't know, maybe I'm coming around to liking it, but I found it really, really challenging.
Why?
Because it was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
Uncomfortable because, and I'm putting words into your mouth here, so please spit them out, that's fine, but uncomfortable because it was a woman that was, you know, like, wasn't particularly enthused with her situation in life, you know, was quite and happily sexually adventurous, and I use adventurous instead of promiscuous because I think promiscuous is a shitty word. But
nah,
did you feel like that because it was a woman? No. Okay.
No. I liked all those things.
Yeah.
Because I think the protagonist is tremendously fleshed out and doesn't fall down to tropes.
Yeah.
I found the language of it so uncomfortable because it's really sharp and unforgiving.
Yeah.
And it's really vivid. And there's one example of where she describes her thought processes of going through her like a barbed wire sieve.
Yeah.
And I think it's more that being inserted into someone's mindset of the world, and they're in so much pain.
Yeah.
And they're also so bored, and they're so trapped that I felt...
trapped is a big one, I think. Definitely trapped.
Oh, yeah. The sky metaphor that keeps cropping up, sort of.
Yeah.
Really? Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, Hodgman keeps describing the sky. There's a line where she's talking to her friend, if I can find it with my tabs.
Great system.
Yeah. Well, it's a
You
blue
would say
tab,
that.
so the sky I ventured is a beautiful blue, if a little unnatural. Well, you do know where you are with a beautiful sky of unnatural blue. It's those moody grey skies that keep naturalistically changing I don't like. So the I, of course, would be the protagonist, and then her friend. I think those two sentences do so much work in terms of characterization, and also in how they view the world.
Yeah, how those two characters have a completely different idea. Yeah. Can I just say, like, Fee, when you were talking about the language, it kind of almost, in some ways, reminds me of Amy McBride's A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing. The language in that is so much more jagged and abrupt than what this is, absolutely, 100%. But there is that sense of the work that the reader has to do to meet the story halfway. It's not just served up on a platter for you. You have to do a little bit of digging, which I kind of appreciate as a reader. I don't mind that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think if you're a reader who appreciates being grounded in the story, I don't feel like necessarily like certain, but I felt this sort of, as I was reading it, it kind of reminded me of like how you feel when you're sort of disassociating.
Yeah.
I felt like there's that distance when you're sort of half there, or you're sort of just on autopilot. Yeah. Almost. So it was hard to grasp in that way. So that's why I think I sort of focused more on the ideas rather than the story
than the characters.
Itself. Yeah.
Did you think? I mean, I feel like the narrator was, like you said, Fee, quite fleshed out, but the supporting cast, you know, the rest of the characters were pretty flat in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
I thought that was intentional.
Yeah, I think it was.
She's getting things from them, and that's all she needs. Like, they're really... She only sees... so she's got two mates, two guys. She sees one on a Tuesday, one on a Thursday. She gets different things from both of them.
Yeah.
And it's very transactional, but I feel like all her relationships are
quite transactional.
And the transactions she has with her husband are incredibly brief, and she even calls it playing a role. And I feel like if the supporting cast were really fleshed out, well-rounded, they're not actually doing justice to her perspective of the world, because we're in her shoes, like hanging out with the dude with the whip. I mean, they're going to play games for a while, have sex, that's it. They don't have anything beyond that.
Yeah.
Jonathan, it's more complex, but at the same time, when he's in his hour of need and he's literally crying, she like spends, I don't know, however long, 45 minutes to actually get back to him, and he's just waiting on the other end of the phone, and she literally says, oh, I kind of hoped he had hung up by now. Like, she's getting certain things from certain people, but she doesn't even know what she wants, because she's in such a trapped situation, and it's almost like a jail, and she's looking out on the world, particularly at the neighbor with the lawn, through her Venetian blinds. And she's kind of, I feel like as readers of this book, we've got the view of the world that is quite segmented, it's fragmented, we get little snippets, and it's quite claustrophobic. Even though we're in this kind of big, beautiful place, it still is tremendously claustrophobic.
It's the suburbs.
Yeah.
And
I think it's just the suburbs.
She feels that way. She feels trapped. I think, I'm projecting on her, she feels trapped where she is. And so I feel like you get the sense of that because she feels that way. Of course, that's how you get that sort of feeling of, the world closing in on her.
Yeah, and there's like the suburbs plus Tasmania is an island of itself. I mean, you said there's a few references like to Melbourne being like this sort of far
mainland.
off. Mainland. Where she is, what's the saying? No man is an island, but I feel like she is a woman who's on this island of herself, and she's trying to like reach. Yeah, she's sort of trying to reach out and feel things and have experiences, but there's nothing that can really fill that sort of void. Yeah,
it's like when she says, the clock stops at 3 every day because there's nothing else to fill the time. That's,
getting back to that feeling of the book. When I was reading it, I was just like, would you guys recommend it?
I think I would, because I'm a big fan of Australian literature by Australian women, and I think they're important, and I guess one of the main focuses of our podcast. But also, I think there's a lot of beauty to the language. I think it's worth reading for that alone, even if you can't connect with the character or anything like that. Read it because so much of the language is so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I'd maybe recommend it to a specific type of person. Like, I'd probably recommend this to writers or people who are like in that. This feels very self-aware in its literary sort of audiences, I feel. Also, I don't know, like, I keep toing and froing on how successful that whole parallel storyline with the Indigenous, that Indigenous plus her, the main character, feeling sort of displaced is. Like, I feel like there's a very fine line between sort of being aware and acknowledging that, white people really shouldn't be here and we've sort of dispossessed Indigenous people of their land, and Sylvia Plath, like, my suburban oppression is like the Holocaust type writing. And I don't know where this falls, and I don't really feel qualified to make that decision, so I don't know. It's a very qualified recommendation.
Would you, Fee?
I'm really glad I've read it. I do imagine I'll return to it at some point, mainly because I think this book has the power to haunt you, which sounds really glum. But I feel like good books in a way should haunt you. And haunt you doesn't have to be bad. Yeah, and I think this is really tremendous in transporting you somewhere into somebody else's experience that is not relying on artifice or kind of assumptions. Like, it really, really dives deep. But it is also quite slim, so it's a book that can be easily underestimated. It can also pack really lightly for a plane trip.
Yes.
It's convenient size. I'm really glad that they republished it and brought it back. I think if I did recommend it, people will probably come back to me and say, "Ooh, no, that was a terrible book." Rah, rah, rah. Mainly because it's not an easy book.
Yeah.
But heck, I don't care what people think of my book recommendations, so I'm going to recommend it widely and thoroughly and not really give people a heads up, because I think it's a great book to go into without expectations because it's quite surprising.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe it would be my Christmas gift present to everyone.
Oh man, that's bold.
Yeah.
That is a bold move.
Yeah.
The same book for all my family members.
Yes.
Here. I don't know. Maybe that's how I'm feeling tonight. Maybe I'll feel different some other time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the nature of it.
I'm feeling really generous right now. Christmas gifts for y'all. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, 2 recommendations. What have we been reading, watching, and listening to that we want to give the 2 thumbs up to? Who would like to go first?
Me.
Okay, great. So my first recommendation is The Professor by Terry Castle. The Professor is a personal essay by Terry that sort of explores like power dynamics in same-sex relationships and how that isn't really discussed, especially because the professor in this essay was her professor, and within the LGBTI community we don't really talk about abuse because there's that homophobic assumption that all LGBTI people are predatory.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to feed into that. But it is something that happens, and this is a really nuanced essay. It talks about her growing up and how her sort of lack of experience and insecurities opened her up for this type of emotional abuse. It doesn't really give you any answers. It just sort of lays it out for you. I don't think Terry herself, I think it's really successful because Terry doesn't really, she's exploring it and sort of thinking about it as she's writing it. There's no sort of conclusion that she's sort of wanting you to draw necessarily.
But that's okay.
I think it makes it a very successful, very well written essay. It's also very funny in many places. Like, there's some really great lines, and she's really great at sort of dipping in to like different sort of scenes and then coming back to the main point, and has like a baseline of her life that's quite linear, but it dips in and out. And I think also at the end there's just this great image of this Australian crocodile, and it just sums up so much of this. It just sums up so much of the point of the essay, and it's so great. Anyway,
is Terry Castle an Australian writer?
No, she is American.
Okay.
God, that makes me
Sounds
so
amazing.
intrigued. I'm like, how?
I feel like I'm gonna have to go. Like, is that essay online, or is that like it just in the book?
Yeah. Well, I think I've read in the book. I wouldn't know because I haven't
checked
looked.
it.
Yeah. So yeah, it was just really great.
Awesome.
And I felt like I learned so much because there was so much history. Well, because she's talking about
I
like
love that feeling.
Yeah, she was talking about sort of like the LGBT, like the queer scene in like the 60s and 70s.
Gosh, she covers ground.
Wow.
Yeah.
Comprehensive
There's
essay.
so much stuff that's going on in this essay. Like, because it's like 300 pages.
Wow.
The one essay is 300 pages. Or
That's
the book?
that's a book.
Well, it's like I don't know. I don't have it with me, so I can't really check. But it's a long ass essay.
Wow.
God. What an exploration.
Yeah.
And to end on a crocodile.
Oh, to end. Oh man.
I think all our essays should be ending on crocodiles now.
I
it's
know where I've been
brilliant.
going wrong.
But yeah, just having that, because you don't get to learn much about the history, especially because you have this generation that's just been wiped out because of AIDS.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Moving on to the next recommendation. Patrick Ness, his most recent novel, which is YA, it's called Release. Yet another really gay book, and I'm here for it because of stuff.
And we are
right
here
now.
for your really gay books.
Yeah. So this book essentially it follows the story of this gay teenager. He has a very religious and conservative family. I feel like that sort of implies a certain type of book, and it's not quite that type of book. It also has another parallel storyline that's sort of magic realism, which is interesting, which Patrick Ness does in a lot of his books. I felt, this was just so great in terms of it really is very honest about how gay teens and gay people generally internalize homophobia and the violence of that, and how hard it is to unlearn that. So it was actually hard because I had to like put it down for a bit, because I was reading it as like the plebiscite postal vote stuff was happening. I'm like, maybe this is a little bit too much stuff at the one time. But also like Patrick Ness, his like dialogue is really witty. There's like sex scenes that are like gay sex scenes in a YA book, and I'm like, yay, I'm so here for this and this sex positivity.
Good sex scenes.
Yeah, good sex scenes. Like,
Very nice.
and there's no like literally there's like the main protagonist is like, oh yeah, my female best friend had her sort of first time. It wasn't all she was hoping for, but she had like a good chat with her mum and with me, and then I had and there's no like, there's no difference in how that was handled as well.
Oh, nice.
So I thought it was just really good. And I've tweeted about this book, and I was like, I want to give it to my 16-year-old self. Like, here. Oh, man.
You need a DeLorean.
Yeah, I really do.
Yeah.
Going back to Under the Sea Dance. Best prom theme ever.
Definitely.
I'm so glad I got it Back to the Future reference in. It's only taking me, 4 episodes? Yes.
Oh, you got that.
Foxy move right there.
And my last recommendation is The Gay and Wondrous Life of Caleb Gallo. This is a YouTube series. It's part of this series has been circulating online. There's just this really great scene from it. The pinnacle of that scene is the line, sometimes things that are more expensive are worse.
Wait, is that a meme?
Yes, it is a meme.
Oh my god!
And I've never seen it.
I've never seen it either.
Yeah.
To be told about a meme is probably worse than never seeing the meme. That's the same thing. I don't know.
This secondhand.
I'm bad. Yeah, it is a secondhand meme. Please explain the meme.
Oh, it's great. There's some quality memeing stuff from that, but I'm not going to go into it. But basically, it's like this fly on the wall of having a group of friends who are gay or trans, and how that, like, it's just really fun and upbeat. It's sort of about dating, and it's just really, like...
You look so... Yeah, you're bopping along. I'm loving this.
Oh, yeah, well, it's just...
Did I feel like a group of friends? Because I love watching shows where you're like, I'm one of the gang.
Yeah, it's pretty much like, I'm one of the gang, and there's just, like, that's really funny, and just... You felt really... Like, it's really uplifting in a way.
I think I need that. That sounds great. I want to watch that.
Definitely. There's 5 episodes. I don't know if they're going to do another season, but that's sort of the 5 episodes. It's like a sort of arc in itself. And it's really nice and gay. I liked it. So, yeah.
Can I just say thank you, Ning, for bringing YouTube series into my life? Because I will go and watch this one for sure.
Sure.
But I also watched the Harry Potter one after you recommended it.
Yeah.
And just had a great time. I just think that's really... wonderful that there is like YouTube series and people just like make their own
it's great
stuff. Anyway, big fan. Thank you for bringing them into my life.
No worries.
All right, Fia, have you got your extremely long list ready to go?
It's not a long list, it's a curated list.
Same thing.
A lot of thought went into this. So my first one is a book that's been around for a couple of years now, and it is great. It is The Night Guest by Fiona McFarlane, and it won a swag of awards when it was first published. And she's since written a short story collection as well called These High Places, I think. And she is such a delicious writer. It's that sort of writing where you're like, give me more cake. It is so good because her descriptions are just so fresh and original, and it's kind of like a wordy book, and I really love wordy books. Like, I mean, Blue Skies is like sparse and spare and beautiful. Yeah, whatever. Give me like dense words where it's just like these sentences just run on, and there's like semicolons left, right, and center, and I was just like, And the actual story itself is great. It's about 2 women. There is Ruth, who's an older woman, and she lost her husband 2 years ago, and they'd just moved to the seaside. They've done like the sea change sort of thing, but now he's dead, and she's growing old in this house that she never really wanted to live in. And then suddenly somebody from the government, Frida, comes along to help, and before she knows it, Frida has moved in, and it's this kind of mystery of who's in control of the situation, the power dynamic. It's a book about aging. It's a book about trust, family, the responsibilities over elderly people, about dementia. And there is also this tremendously beautiful love story that kind of runs through it. And there is such a sweet sex scene between 2 geriatrics, which I never thought that I would say, but it was gorgeous. Like, Fiona McFarlane can write great sex scenes for people in their 80s, because
that's such a specific, that's like such a niche.
Yeah, I'm sure she can do like all ages and whatever, but this was just tremendously beautiful. And it's a book that is, it's eerie and unsettling, and just the descriptions of Frida's hair alone is worth the price of admission, because her hair is dynamic and it changes daily, and it's
fantastic.
I've been reading a little bit of science lately because I love science, mainly because it's fun. And I read Seeing Voices by Oliver Sacks, and it was published in 1989 and it was updated in 1990. I was like, that's a swift update.
It's like, 12 months?
Yeah.
Wow. The turnaround.
What happened?
But it's really interesting. A lot happened politically with the deaf community in that period of time, so it's quite updated for kind of the transition between a sense of ownership of deaf culture and it becoming recognised in America as being a culture rather than a disability. So the book is really interesting about kind of a fantastic history of how deafness has been seen in terms of the education system and the medical system. It's really interesting, the book itself, because it's quite in the early days of the idea of neuroplasticity existing.
Yeah.
So the science in the book is incredibly dated, which I found tremendously interesting, because when I studied neuroscience at uni, the education I was getting, it was quite kind of resoundingly agreed upon that the brain's plastic. And so that was kind of my education. I was like, yeah, why would you ever believe otherwise? But to read a book about science where that was just even the slimmest sense of an idea or a possibility, it's kind of great, because you would never read a textbook that is that out of date.
It's like traveling backwards.
So much so. And it was really kind of great, because all the kind of how Sachs writes is his idea is really infusing the person back into the medical system. And he copped a lot of flack for his case studies, because he gave a lot of personal details about the patients to really tell their story. So his writing is really beautiful and characterized and descriptive. But it kind of, he's done such a great service, because this book, whilst the science is kind of really old, it's kind of a great sort of journey into deaf culture and learning sign language, and kind of, it was really, really cool and political and heartbreaking and gorgeous, and encourage everyone to read it. I've also been reading, I've read Future Sex by Emily Witt.
Interesting, just coming out from Melbourne Writers Festival.
That's why I picked it up. It's a super evocative cover. I didn't take it to work because I think it would have been a little bit too racy for the tea room. It's basically a woman and a dildo, and it's a gorgeous cover, but I was like, I don't know if I really want to describe this book to people at work. So I didn't. Did read it on the tram though.
That's probably a good call.
But it's a great conversation starter.
Yeah.
Don't know if it works as a book, because it's quite it's a series of essays, and her voice is quite disjointed and it's not quite clear. The book is kind of set up where, from the introduction, it's basically Emily Witt saying, when I reached 30, I had these thoughts about the world. You know, women get married. I am attracted to men. I believe in monogamy. And then by the end of my journey, which is over the span of 5 years of exploring kind of what is sex and sexuality on the internet and in different subcultures in America, in different geographical locations, she kind of makes the conclusion that sex is a lot broader than what she originally thought it was. But the actual book itself doesn't reveal much of her own journey. There's one essay which is actually tremendously irritating, where she goes to Burning Man, and it's basically she's getting high most of the time, which is fine, but it's kind of a shitty essay to read about someone having all this sex and doing these drugs, but without actually hearing about the sex and drugs. It's kind of like the come down from it all, and her trying to remember different things. So it's kind of like hearing a really shitty story from a friend.
There's a good long form interview with her about this book.
She's
so
much.
I'll pop that up on the show notes.
That really interested me in the book, because she's very good at talking about sex, and I think this book would have really worked well if it was like a podcast series or even a YouTube series.
Yeah, right.
Because it's a really good conversation starter. I think it's a great book because it really talks about female sexuality in general, but female sexuality in the internet age, which is kind of the internet and sex is such a strange, weird place. And I learned so much in this book that I was just taking like pictures of pages, and I was like messaging friends, and we were just having really good conversations about relationships and sex and expectations. And I think this is a great book club book if you want to like talk to your mates about sex, or your work colleagues. Take it into work. Start talking about the future of sex. But don't expect much to find out about like wit, like the way it opens up this strange structure to the book. I also read Our Magic Hour by Jennifer Down. And that is a beautiful book. It's a book about grief, and I felt quite glum during and after. And I still feel glum.
But it's a beautiful book.
It is a beautiful book, yeah. It's a book about friends, and it's a book about losing a friend and how that can reverberate in many different ways and over quite a long period of time, even post-funeral and losing someone quite quickly. And I think it's structurally it's quite interesting. It kind of follows one character quite closely, but you're still kept quite distant from them, and it's almost that kind of sense of grief being a numbing sort of experience. So when I was reading this, I was feeling a lot, but I think I was feeling my own sort of experiences.
Your own experiences, yeah.
Which, I mean, is always unsettling when you're reading about grief because it kind of shakes things up. But I think it was done really well. Yeah, good book. And I've been reading about birds because they're great. And I think everyone should read about birds. And this was a shock to me when I discovered, like, in the last 18 months that I really, really like birds. I didn't know that about myself. But I've been reading The Genius of Birds, and it's basically a book all about how birds are actually really clever and they're geniuses. And they have, like, syntax in their language. So, like, they're having, like, full-on conversations. It's so great. Oh. How good is that?
No, I'm so vindicated because near where I live, if you go there in the evening, there's a street that's completely lined with like really tall like palm trees, and so like all these like
that sounds really tropical. Beverly Hills. Watch out.
Oh yeah. And there are all these like rainbow cockatiels, and they fly like across into different trees, and you can hear them all chattering. And I've always like commented like, oh, they sound like old ladies like gossiping, like they're going to like tree to tree, like spraying the goss. And now I'm vindicated.
They totally are gossiping.
With syntax.
Yeah, correct grammar and punctuation. But even things like flocks of birds, thousands, tens of thousands of birds, and they don't crash into each other, and they can maneuver and navigate around like skyscrapers and mountains, and like how the fuck do they do that? How do they do that? Well, let me tell you, because I've been spreading bird facts. Don't get in the flap, guys. Basically, it's a kind of each bird checks out and keeps in mind, I don't know why the number's 7 and if it's consistently 7 across all different types of birds that fly in flocks. But basically they just track 7 birds around them, and each bird is tracking 7 birds. So they just kind of have their own little network.
They're just worrying about their own little bubble, and everybody's got their own little bubble, and that makes sense.
And it's so clever. Well, I don't know. Jennifer Ackerman, The Genius of Birds.
That's going on my list. I think that'd be a really great read.
It is so much fun. Like, literally a book where I just get really excited about it. Almost done. I also have been reading a book that literally you guys are probably reading along with me as well, because I've been screenshotting so many sections from this book. I'm trying to control myself from doing it, but there was just basically a paragraph about the clit that I thought, hey, I think my friends need to know about this. So I screenshotted that and sent it through.
I've been thoroughly enjoying your screenshots, so please don't stop anytime soon.
Goodness, such a great book. And it is Woman and Intimate Geography by Natalie Angria. And it is a stunning nonfiction book. And it's basically a book that I think all human beings should read. Angria makes the comment at the start that she thinks that probably only women will read it because, hey, I mean, the Stella count proves that really women read books written by men and women. Men tend to read books written by men. So she's not too far off the point there, but she kind of addresses the reader as gals. So it kind of feels like you're in a girl gang.
Yeah.
It's really cool. But she talks about hard science in a really easy, accessible way to a point where it's really beautiful and poetic. So even though I've studied all the sort of anatomy and like, you know, the wet labs and reading the science and textbooks, this is the first time where I'm actually like, oh my God, the human body is so fucking amazing that it's exciting to read about science written by someone who is excited by science but has the language to really do it justice, because the descriptions are so evocative that it's structured with each chapter representing a different part of female anatomy. So it goes into eggs and what they are, it goes into the womb and what the womb is, and it goes into breasts. And I didn't realize how political boobs were, but now I'm like, yes, they're so political. And it kind of does a social history as well as a history of science and a history of medicine and the implications of the patriarchy on all of that. But you learn so much through the narrative of all of it, so you don't kind of get bogged down in sort of like fact after fact after fact, yet you kind of like, I've run out of sticky tabs. There's so much good stuff. I've learned so much about my body reading it that I'm like looking down kind of at my uterus going, fucking legend. It's so good. It's such a, I don't know. Everyone should read this book. Man, woman, child, trans, whatever sort of gender identifying. Did you say Nightwalker?
No. What? I don't watch
I think Nightwalker should read it as well.
Yeah.
Non-binary is what I was going for.
Non-binary.
Yeah.
And Nightwalkers, if they can get over the wall to
and
the
dragons.
library.
Definitely dragons.
Yeah, sure. But everyone should read it because you'll learn a lot. And hey. And my final recommendation is a podcast that a friend recommended to me, and I gulped it down in 2 bites because it's fun, and it's called By the Book, and it's basically a book club podcast, which is shocking that I'm listening to other book club podcasts. I know.
Yeah, just
You're cheating on us.
I feel betrayed.
I get around, whatever. And it's 2 women based in America, and they're great mates, and they read one self-help book at a time, and they have to follow that book to the letter for a period of 2 weeks.
That's somewhat terrifying.
It is so terrifying for, I think, their partners, because they record a lot at home and they carry the recorders around with them, and they test things out on their husbands.
Oh my God.
Which is great fun as a listener, because it's kind of like unfolding in real time.
Yeah.
And they do like a diverse range of books. So they did Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And they both kind of enter the book thinking, ugh, which I think most people do, because it's a fucking sexist book and it should be burnt.
Tell me what you really think. What do you really think? I'm not sure.
Has set us back decades, and I think it's fucking cruel to humanity. But anyway, I listened with open ears, and it was such a great episode because they like try and implement the things into that Gray, the author of the book, recommends that you should do in a relationship, of how a woman should communicate and how a man should communicate. And it is excruciating but wonderful listening, because I highly recommend this podcast. And they also do The Secret. So they try and manifest things into their life, and it's just, I don't know, I find that sort of stuff fun, because at one point one of them finds like $5 and she gets so excited, and it's just like really great, because she's like, oh my God, it's working. And there's one tip from The Secret, because I haven't read the book, but it kind of feels like you do get a chance to read the book because they explain the book so well. Then they carry it out, and part of The Secret is to bring good things into your life, you have to smile for a period of 60 seconds each day, which when I first heard that, I thought, that's not that long. Like, I smile, like I can do that. This is fine. It is so long. Like, I have to like psych myself up and put a good song on before I can smile for 60 seconds. Like, and I found myself trying to do it like, you know, when I'm looking at birds, but they fly away. So basically,
they're so unnerved by the smile. They're just like, no, I'm out.
I don't know how much I can manifest into my life now. I just can't do it. I don't have the muscular strength in my jaw to do that. But that podcast is great. It's called By the Book. And I will stop recommending stuff there because on to Kirby.
Well, I've only got 2 things to recommend.
Good, because I think we need to institute a cap, possibly.
Oh, but I've got like 3 more books on here. Anyway, I've got a social life, guys.
Spread them out. Like,
I've got other things.
you're going to run dry eventually.
Should run out of books to recommend.
I'll
Yeah.
suddenly manifest like a social life and I won't be able to read things.
Yeah, and then you'll have to, like, recommend, like, the sort of shame, like, pleasure reading stuff, and...
No shame in reading.
Well, I felt no shame this month with the 2 books that I read. I absolutely adored them. I read more than 2 books, but I'm just recommending these 2. So the first one is Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Castle, depends on which side of the river you're from. Published in 1962, only 3 years before she died. It was actually her final book.
Oh.
And I love it. It's been sitting in my TBR for since the start of the year, and I'm so annoyed with myself that I've taken this long to get to it, because I read it from cover to cover on the plane back from Perth and absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
So it's the story of it's a family, quite a well-to-do family, living in New England in the US, and then half the family dies in mysterious circumstances. They're poisoned. The only who remains from the family is 2 sisters, Constance and Mary Cat, or Mary Catherine. She gets called Mary Cat, and the uncle Julian are the only 3 that remain. The older sister Constance is charged with the murder of the of her family.
Oh, she charged?
Yeah, she goes to court, gets acquitted.
Ooh.
But what happens, and the book takes place quite a few years after that, like 5 or 6 years after that, after she gets acquitted, and they're quite ostracized in the community. Like, nobody wants anything to do with them. Like, Constance actually never leaves the house or the property that they live on. So it's an interesting setup. So the story basically starts there, and this mysterious cousin turns up, and things sort of fall apart from then on. But it is marvelous. Mary Cat is an incredible character. She's so great. Even though she's not necessarily a good person, she's still a great character. I absolutely loved it, and I'm really annoyed with myself that I waited so long to read it, because I feel like it's going to be one of those books that I just go back and read again and again and again. And I love Shirley Jackson. The Lottery, which is a short story of hers, is one of my favourite short stories ever. I think it is perhaps the best short story in the world. I don't know, big call.
Henry Sugar.
Okay. But yeah, so just an incredible book, and it's quite short. It's quite small. You can knock it over on a 3-hour plane trip to Perth.
I did tell you that I can't finish that book. I'm trying really hard, but it was really disruptive because I started having nightmares. It's quite bizarre, and it's sort of quite sinister and creepy and all the rest of it, but I loved every second of it. As soon as the cousin arrived, I just started having a series of the most evocative nightmares of my life.
Once he gets there, you get this sort of sick feeling in your belly, like, oh my god, what's going to happen?
So
and you can sort of it builds and it builds, and you know that things are going to
making me really nervous.
But it's really, really good. Maybe read it in the daytime. I don't know, but yeah. Anyway, fantastic. Highly recommend that. Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle. The next one I want to recommend is one I actually bought when I was over in Perth. It's a graphic novel about Agatha Christie.
Yeah, I love it.
I'm a big fan of Agatha Christie. I've actually only read one of her books, but I've watched a lot of Miss Marple and Poirot because my mum's a big fan. And this is a graphic novel which is about her life. So it kind of starts off in her childhood and, moves through her marriage and having children and her career and how successful she is, and it even covers the 10 days that she disappeared in 1926.
Mystery.
Very much a mystery. What's really interesting about that is that she actually checked into a hotel using the name of the woman that her husband was having an affair with, which is so great.
Peak petty, and
Amazing.
I'm here for it.
So good. But what's really great about this graphic novel is that throughout this sort of story of her life, her characters pop up.
Oh,
So like Poirot, Poirot pops up as a character, and Miss Marple's there, and it's really great. And so she has arguments with Poirot. Like, she clearly did not like him, and I think I kind of knew that she didn't really like him as a character, but he was so successful and she had to keep writing him. But,
The Sherlock Holmes syndrome.
Yeah, but it's so great. It was only published last year. Just I think I devoured that in like an hour or something. And the illustrations are really wonderful. It's just super fantastic. So
Sounds
can't recommend
fab.
that. Yeah, I mean, happily we'll lend it to you. Just wonderful read. So that's all I got.
Right.
Short and sweet.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Okay. So thanks very much for listening to Literary Canon Ball. We hope you'll tune in next month, where we'll be talking about Sidewalks by Valeria Luiselli. Now, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, so I apologise in advance. Super excited about that one.
I've heard good things about this book.
Already got my copy. Pumped to jump in.
Oh, man,
goodness.
you're on it.
Oh,
Yeah, super organised.
Jeez. Okay.
Shit, I need to get it.
Okay, so in the meantime, if you want to continue the conversation, or you just want to be digital friends, you can follow us on Twitter at Lit Canon Ball, on Instagram at Literary Canon Ball, and we're on Facebook as well. Just look for Literary Canon Ball. And if you have something to tell us that's a little more than 140 characters, you can send us an email at literarycannonball@gmail.com, and make sure you check out our website literarycannonball.com, where you'll find a full wrap of the show notes and a full list and links to all our recommendations. That's literarycannonball.com. And we're out.
Yeah.
Cup of tea, love.
Perfect. Bye.
Bye. Yeah.
Cannonball, ball.
Ball.
Is there an echo in this room?